So in this video, I'm gonna go ahead and install DNA Center 1.28 on VMware. This is ESXI Host. This is obviously not something that you're gonna want to do in production. This is just for lab purposes only. For those that think that DNA cannot be installed on a VMware infrastructure, the truth is yes, it's indeed possible. However, you're gonna have to have a physically large server in terms of CPU and RAM. So as you can see here, the build that I have is 320 gig of RAM only, 28 CPUs. I have the E5 2697. On top of that, I actually have 3 SSD drives. Each one of them is going to be 1.82 terabytes. They're all Samsung. SSD is going to be a must. SAS drive or anything like that is just simply not going to work. So I'm going to go ahead here and provision my SAS drive real quick. Sorry, I meant the SSD drives real quick so we can initialize and begin the install. So this is going to be SSD 1. And we're just gonna creating in full. Again, I'm gonna create a new data store, and here I'm using actually ESXi 6.7. You can use anything else, but nothing below 6.5, I would say. So SSD 2 is what I'm adding. Finishing here, and I'm gonna eat the last one here over here. This is the last SSD I got, which is going to be the 1.75. I'm going to call it SSD 3. Okay, just going to add it next, provision it. The next thing I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to need to upload the DNAC ISO file to one of my data stores. To do so, I'm just going to go to my main data store. I'm going to browse it, and I'm just going to simply upload it, upload a file. And I'm just gonna choose DNA 128, and it's probably gonna take a while to upload, so I'm just gonna pause this video until the upload is complete, so we can complete the next provisioning phases. Okay, so the file upload is now complete, and we are ready to create the VM for DNAC. From the main menu under virtual machines, we're going to go ahead and click on create register VM, create a new virtual machine. We're going to click next, and this is going to be where we need to customize a few things to make it work. Name is obviously DNAC. Maybe we're going to call it actually DNAC because I'm not going to have anything else. OS family here is very important. We're just going to put other, and under the version we're also going to put other 64. So let's see where that is. Other 64. We're gonna click next, and this is where things are a little bit tricky, where you wanna do the installation. So over here, we're just gonna choose the very first SSD drive, which is SSD 1 for me, and that's provisioning basically the very first hard disk. So we're gonna need 3 hard disk provisioned, so DNAC can perform 3 partitions, SDA, SDB, as well as SDC. If you miss on one partition, the installation will simply fail. So the boot is going to be on SSD 1, so we're just gonna hit next, and we're gonna just wait a little bit because this is where we have to adjust the RAM and CPU, pretty much everything. RAM is gonna be very crucial, so for sake of this video, I'm just gonna give it 250 gig. You can get away with much less than that. I would say you can, the safest one is up to 196 gig. I've seen the system idle at 170 gig RAM, so it's up to your preference what you want to do and what kind of risk you want to take. Now, that being said, what we're going to do now is make sure, so the hard disk here is going to be a minimum of, which is going to be the bootable disk, is going to be a minimum of 480 gig. And we're gonna add disks after once this is done. Network adapter, we're just gonna leave it as is now. We're gonna come back to that in a minute. I just wanna pass this. As far as CPU, I give it everything I got. So what I would do here is normally, you know, whatever horsepower I have, I will just do 2 sockets. Well, in my example, I can't do here. So let's take a look here. So I will just give it everything I got, which is pretty much 56 virtual CPUs. we're gonna go ahead, click next here, and finish it. We are nowhere near done. We're just gonna come back to this VM in a second and do some customization. But I wanted to show you the networking here so we can do some, because my ESXi here is fairly vanilla, so there's nothing configured. We gotta go in and add some VLANs for management and that sort of stuff. So under vSwitch 0, I want to be able to add ports. Where did it go? Port groups. Here we go. So under port groups, I'm going to add a port group. At this point, I only have one link connected to my switch, and that's just a 10 gig link. Doesn't have to be in your case. 1 gig is more than enough. But I want to just start tagging things because I want the DNA center to sit on VLAN 11. So this is going to be a VLAN 11 for me. So VLAN 11, VLAN ID is going to be 11, and it's all on switch, obviously on virtual switch 0. And in my case here, I'm just going to log in and show you what setup I got on my VLAN 11. It's really nothing fancy, so let's see. So this is sitting on VRF 200, and the VLAN is 11.192.168.10. That's all. So now VLAN 11 is provisioned. I want to add another VLAN just in case I'm gonna need it. Not sure or not, but I'm just gonna add VLAN 15. I think, yeah, 15 is gonna be fine. So VLAN 15 for provisioning as well. You need to define all the NIC cards before you actually begin the installation. Once you begin installation, there's no going back to DNA and actually adding. You can try to add NICs to DNA, but that's just not gonna work for you. So whatever network cards you want to use in advance, I suggest you provision them because it's gonna be in one way. There's no turning around here. So VLAN 13 as well, and this is going to be 13. I'm provisioning that and I'm just adding it. Now we go back to our virtual machines so we can actually do the customization I was telling you about earlier. Over here, we're going to do edit settings. Once it loads, give it a second. Okay, so here's where things must match, or otherwise the install will fail. The original DNA Center appliance has a lot of hard disks in it, so one of them is going to be RAID 1, and then you're going to have the remaining are going to be 2. I believe they use RAID 10, I can't remember, so it's probably RAID 10, and each one is partitioned to 4 terabytes. So we want to give DNA Center a minimum of 3 disks so the installation can succeed. Over here, we're just going to have to add a disk, new disk, and the size of the disk is going to be, so this is going to be for DNA Center SDB. And over here, we want to go and allocate as much as possible. So I'm going to give it 1.28 terabyte, which is, I think that's the maximum size. So I'm just going to give it all here. 1.2. Always give it a little bit less so you don't lose swap in this. 1.2 terabytes. Okay, and so that's for disk 1. Now we want to add another disk and then a third disk. So we're going to add a disk here, new disk, and over here, obviously, we're going to have to point it to SSD2, which we created earlier. So we want to browse. We created SSD2, which is a 2 terabyte drive. So we're going to make sure we select it. And we're going to obviously, for this case, I'm just going to give it, all the size that I got. So I do have a lot of size, so I don't care. So at this point, what do we have? We got disk 1 and we got disk 2, which we're going to adjust to a 1.7 terabytes, right? So that's it, right? So let's do a quick revision here. Disk 1, 480 gigabytes. Disk 2, 1.2 terabytes. Don't go less than that. You're just not going to pass. And disk 3 is going to be 1.7 terabytes. VM, this is what we've been creating, right? So we want to make sure that this one here is selected, and now it's not showing before I save. So I got to save here, then come back to this because the actual network provisioning port is not complete. So I'll give it a second and then we'll edit it again. Here we go. So over here, go ahead and edit the settings, and let's see if the network cards are gonna appear or not. Let's see. Okay. Should be able to see the other VLANs. So VLAN 11 in my case is my very first one, and I'm just gonna add another one here real quick. I want two NICs. In my case, one for management and the other one is gonna be part of the fabric. So I've added it, and you know, I'm obviously not gonna want it to be part of VLAN 11. This could be used for clustering or whatever you need. So I'm just gonna put it on VLAN 13 to get going at least. Now this is where obviously there's no operating system, so we're gonna have to make sure that we are choosing the to boot from ISO, which I've uploaded earlier. So we're gonna just under CD-ROM, we're gonna go data store ISO file, and we're just gonna choose 128 ISO that I've actually uploaded a while ago, and it took me like 10 minutes. So obviously right now there is no operating system, and the default behavior is gonna be for a VM that doesn't have OS to boot from CD as it goes through its booting sequence. I'm gonna go ahead now and power it on and, you know, go through the installation. Right click, power, come on, power on, and okay, so here it failed. Let's see why it failed. Monitor loop, let's take a look why it failed. I'm pretty sure it's something to do with the disk. Yeah, so no space left on the device, which I mentioned earlier that you're not supposed to actually max out your disk. So we're gonna have to reduce one of the disk sizes in this VM, and this is crucial. So let's go ahead and start tweaking things around until we get the right numbers. So let's see here. I have a feeling it's, you know, that first one that I actually did, 1 terabyte, and the disk was 2, and I had already used 400 gig. So I'm pretty much left with no swap for the ESXi to actually fire it up. Let's see. So this one is fine. This one, I'm pretty sure this is the guy here that is actually complaining, but let's drop it down to 1 terabyte instead and see how it goes. Okay. Which is larger than the original client. Well, I don't want it to be larger. Okay. I see what happens. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have to delete the disk. So we're gonna just delete the disk and re-add it. Let's see. Okay. Obviously, there's a lot of tweaking to get this working, and you know, to get the disk size to the right ratio where DNA is going to accept it. So we're just gonna delete all the disks now and re-add them because the sequence is important in sizing. So we're gonna delete both disks we added, and we're just gonna reprovision them again. All right, so DNA. We're just gonna do edit settings, and we're just gonna add the disks. Okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and basically add the disk, add a new hard disk because we cleared it. Make sure that this is SSD 1, so it is SSD 1, but instead this time we said we're gonna give it only 1 terabyte and see how it goes. So this is 1 terabyte for this disk. We're gonna add another disk like we discussed earlier. Add hard disk, new disk, and obviously we're gonna choose. We're just going to choose the SSD2 from drop-down menu, browse, go to SSD2, select it, and we're gonna switch this to terabyte. It's okay, and we're gonna just use, I would say, let's not max it out. It sounds like VM doesn't like it, ESXi, it doesn't like you when you're actually maxing data stores out. So let's take a look here. So let's power it on and see if that does the trick, or we're gonna run into the same issue or not. I'm pretty sure that should fix it. Yeah, things are looking better. Let's take a look. Nothing great. Okay, so we're just gonna click on console. As you can see, it already booted up here, and we are at the maglev installation screen. So we're just going to go ahead and click on the 31st option, which is the maglev installer. I'm going to try to maximize the screen so it's more clear. So here we go. I don't know if I can. Won't let me. Here we go. Should be better. Nope. Nope. Okay, that's better. Sorry if the screen is appearing small, but obviously this is a console within VM, and you can see here through the installation, the very first thing it actually does, it validates the throughput of the disk. And actually, if you do not have SSD, this is what it will fail on you right away, because throughput is important. We're going to start DNAC cluster. Obviously, we're not joining a cluster, so start DNAC, and this is where we want to begin everything, right? So I'm on VLAN 11. I'm just going to give this 192.168.10.23, 213, 255, 255, 192.168 done. And over here, DNS servers, we're just going to leave it public. Again, this is for lab purposes. This is not something you're going to want to do in real operations. Cluster link, I'm choosing this as a cluster link just so I can actually zoom in through the installation. And next, you're going to see here, obviously, the next network card, which I actually placed. This network card is, you can use it usually for cluster link or other purposes or management only. But in my case, I'm just not going to use it. I don't need it. I'm only doing an installation for sake of labbing and showing you guys how you can get away with it with VM. So over here, we're done. We're just going to hit next. And at this point, obviously, we're going to hit proceed. Please wait, give it a couple minutes. Over here, have your, I would say at this point, 14. So the virtual IP is something you want to keep in mind, because in a DNA cluster, you're going to need a virtual and a host. So I'm using 14 for a virtual, and I'm using 213 for a host. Next thing you want to make sure you keep handy is your NTP server. So make sure you have an NTP server over here. This is your password that I'm entering. Just keep in mind there's actually two passwords here. One of them is going to be for your SSH access, which is root, maglev, and the other password is going to be for the DNAC graphic interface. So I just set up my password, and it's probably going to ask me for NTP. Here we go. I do have my NTP ready. I use public NTP. Again, this is just testing purposes, not something you're going to do in production, obviously. Here, it's going to validate NTP, and we're going to give it a minute. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, subnet services. Make sure you actually allocate, two subnet services that are not part of your network. These are going to be used by DNA services. Like every time they have a Dockers or containers are going to actually use their own IP addresses every service. So make sure over here you have something ready for DNA that is not part of your network. Obviously, this is not a tutorial to show you, how things should be done. This is not how to tell you how DNA works. This is just to basically give you some education of if you actually face a situation where you want a lab DNA center and in a VM environment and you happen to have a lot of RAM and CPU, then you probably could get away. Next here, back, cancel, proceed. We're going to go ahead and hit proceed and wait. So shortly, I'm going to pause the wizard because obviously it's going to take hours to finish. But it's very important in the very few phases coming in. There are few indicators that are going to tell us if the actual installation is going to succeed or it's going to fail. The indication that I look for usually is the partitioning, right? So if you see DNA Center during this installation partitions, creating 3 partitions, SDA1, which it's doing now, and SDB and SDC, you should be fine. So it's now doing SDA, and we're doing SDA6. Let's see if it's going to go ahead and SDB. So it took the second partitions, and I'm waiting for SDC as well. SDC. So if you see that DNA Center has, during the partitioning and the format, created SDA 1 and all the stuff, SDB 1, 2, 3, it doesn't matter, SDC, then that means DNA is going probably to continue and succeed, provided you have, the memory and CPU. If you see during the installation that it skipped, creating a partition for SDB or SDC, then 99% the installation will fail. DNA Center is going to place its containers and configuration database data and all that sort of stuff on different in different locations. So although you will see that the actual installation is going to proceed, it's not going to halt, but during later on when you're pushing maglev packages, you will see that it's actually failing miserably. So I'm trying to save you time. If you don't see SDA, SDB, SDC, please make sure that you go back through this installation wizard and follow my steps. Most likely you have the partitions wrong. That being said, I'm just gonna go ahead now and pause this video until the installation is finished, so I show you what are the the final steps that we need to do. Momentarily here and there, what I would do is I'm just gonna open a notepad just to type it in. I would basically, obviously, I installed this on 192.168.10.213. What I would do from here and there, I would just basically SSH to the box and make sure you SSH over port 2222. Username is going to be maglev. Password is going to be whatever you've indicated. And I'm just gonna type here your password. From there on, what I would just do occasionally is I would just do maglev package status. I will just do this every maybe half an hour to an hour, which basically shows me the progress if the packages are being deployed or not. Usually there's a good indicator how the installation is going to continue or not. If you go ahead and execute the maglev package status and you come across errors, chances are your installation failed, you're not meeting the hardware requirements, etc. You'd have to do it all over again. So these are things that you might want to keep in mind. I'll go ahead, pause, get back to you when this thing is done. Okay, so it looks like the installation finished here. I came back in 2 hours and it's almost done. Let's take a look real quick. So it's asked me to log in again, which is fine. All right, so as you can see here, pretty much all the packages are deployed with the optional ones that I did not install. So we'll go ahead and fire up our browser so we can take a look at DNA. .214 or 213 will respond because the actual host is 213. 214 is the VIP. So admin as well, same password that we set up during the installation. And success. Let's see. So I'm gonna skip all these, initial configuration. We'll get back to it later. I just wanna basically show you a few things before we wrap up. So I'm skipping everything. I could come back to this and set it up later. So next, go to Systems 360. Okay. So over here, where you want to go is you want to go here to the cloud at the top and go to software updates. You click on that and that's going to show you what's been installed and what's not been installed. Installed apps, pretty much all the core ones, Base, NCP services and assurance. And updates obviously is optional. So I'm going to go ahead now and pretty much install the remaining items, but that's not mandatory depending on your deployment, I guess. Obviously we want to come back here and see how much resources we're consuming and how much this installation indeed requires in terms of CPU, RAM, storage. Let's see. Just loading. Okay, so used in idle state, you're at 190 gig RAM, pretty intense. CPU, not so much. Used 3.24 terabytes. So you could tell, I mean, you're going to need a very good machine to actually run DNA Center. I can't stress this enough. FYI, I was not able to get DNAC to work on any platform that has a DDR3 RAM, so it looks like the DDR4 is a minimum requirement. SSD is also a must. I can't think of anything else to share with you other than this, obviously. So we're just gonna wrap up now, and hopefully we'll catch up in next videos.